everyone. I'm your host, Heather Ashley, and welcome to another episode of Women of Her Story, a podcast dedicated to celebrating women who have made or are making their mark on our society. Sitting next to me on this Tuesday, per usual, is Master Woodcrafter, Oakland Cherry Pine. How are you doing today?
Chop, chop. Doing just fine. How are you doing?
Pretty well.
Perfect.
Are you ready for our extra special episode today?
Yes, I'm so ready. Please.
So we have Kirsten W. Larson with us today to help us learn some extra details about our Her Story subject today. Hi, Kirsten.
Hi.
Thank you
Good
so
morning.
much for joining us. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you. Excited to be here.
Awesome.
I'm happy to have you.
Well, she was previously employed at NASA and is now a children's author. Kirsten wrote the book Wood Wire Wings, Emma Lilian Todd Invents an Airplane, and it was released earlier this year. Let's get started. Emma Lilian Todd was born on June 10th, 1865 in Washington, D.C. to Mary Todd. Her father's name is unknown, but her mother was Mary. She had one sister, Cora, and Emma was a self-taught inventor. Her grandfather, assumedly on her mother's side, was also an inventor. I bet that's where she got the bug for tinkering. She would save tin cans from her dinner to have materials to create. And she says, quote, "Ever since I can remember, I couldn't have a piece of tin or wire in my hands without bending it, twisting it to make something. I was always making things, and my mother saw to it that I wasn't discouraged, that I had the tools I wanted."
Well, and I think that's a really an interesting point and quite unusual for this day. Her mother was so encouraging of her efforts. And there's a great story from when she's a little girl, where she would just take apart machines, typewriters, clocks, anything she could get her hands on to figure out how it worked. And she tells a great story about tearing apart the family clock and not being able to get it back together. And her mom, instead of getting mad, her mom just calmly calls in somebody to fix it. And she says the only time her mom ever got mad, her mom must have been like a dressmaker. On the census, she's listed as like a vest maker, but she must have been some kind of a seamstress.
Mm-hmm.
And one time she used her mom's scissors, her sewing scissors, and dulled them. And that was the only time her mom got a little miffed, but her solution was to buy her own scissors.
Wow.
Yeah, right? So for the 1870s, can you imagine, another woman encouraging her daughter's inventive habits?
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That shows, that's probably, I would assume, where she got her drive and inspiration to be creative, from a mother who's like, yeah, do it. I don't know.
That's so sweet.
Find your passion.
Well, and it's kind of, to me, it sort of reminds me of like the maker movement before it was the maker movement, and here's her mom just sort of, here's everything, do what you will, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we do a lot of times with kids today is, here's a toilet paper roll and a piece of wood and go for it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, that's such a great story. I feel like even today, if someone took apart like the family clock or the family, I don't know, what would it be, computer?
Yeah.
Like it would be not very celebrated.
Yeah,
I feel like even in most households today, like that's amazing. What a great upbringing for her. With a mind and passion for invention, it seems obvious which direction her career would go. Big shocker, a woman inventor? Not in that day and age, as we were saying before. Always a problem solver, Emma taught herself typewriting and started working at the patent office.
Yeah, and this is really interesting because she's doing it at a really interesting time in history. This is the Industrial Revolution, the age of invention. And people are coming up with some really wacky ideas for how to fly, and they are sending them to the patent office. So there are I have in my files, some great pictures of like a man with some very beautiful angel-like wings that he submitted as a patent,
Wow.
and so have to imagine with all these patents coming across her desk, this is probably one of her early exposures to the idea of flying. And some of the
Yeah.
ideas are pretty outrageous.
So interesting.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical. I can imagine coming across that type of uh document, like submission, and you're like, I want to feel like it could work, but I feel like it's probably not. I wonder if went further to like that type of a design went further to become like a paragliding sort of situation.
Oh.
Well, and there was a lot of early experimentation. Chanute was very famous for his gliders in the late 1800s. So in terms of what they call heavier than air flight, airplanes, gliders were an early innovation. And so a lot of people were working with that, and also balloons. So for a long time, people thought hot air balloons were really going to be the way we were going to fly. And so when these patents come in, they're this mishmash of balloons and things that look like gliders and a sky cycle, a man.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
cool. Bicycling. Yeah. I feel like I've seen that in movies.
I mean, pretty fantastical stuff.
Oh my gosh. Well, after 2 years at the patent office, she left to work in the office of the governor of Pennsylvania. In an article that she wrote later, she claims to have been the first woman to receive an appointment in the executive department of that state. Ms. Todd returned to New York to continue working on her patent career. While in New York, she began to study law and was a member of the first women's law class of New York University in 1890.
Wow.
I know.
That's cool.
She's so cool. In 1896, in partnership with George W. Parker, she was issued a patent for a typewriter copy holder. That's like the
A typewriter copy holder.
It's just like it holds it
In?
up.
Okay.
I feel like we take all those sorts of little inventions for granted, for sure. But the patent number was number 553292. She also invented and patented a cabinet with a folding table, a cannon that could be triggered by solar power,
Wow.
a sundial, and an, I don't know how to pronounce it, Aeolian harp device.
Good luck. I have no idea.
That's so interesting.
I think it's like Aeolian.
Yeah, Aeolian.
Aeolian harp device that could be attached to a tree. And I tried to figure out what that even was, and I couldn't figure out really what that was. So
well, and the interesting thing is I've never, because she's not well known at all, and there's so little documentation about her life, I have actually, I have physically found the patent in the archives for her copy holder.
mm-hmm.
She says she made all these things. I have never been able to document it. So she probably did. Did she submit a patent? I don't know. What's an Aeolian harp? Who knows?
The solar panel, the solar
powered cannon.
What's the purpose of that?
Very interesting.
Like what?
Yeah.
Is it? How different is it than to just light a match? And
the only thing, again, I'm totally speculating here, but maybe it's a way of chiming noon. I don't know. Maybe the sun gets high enough in the sky and it fires off and lets everybody know it's noon. I don't know.
True. Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe it was an accident kind of thing. But it's hysterical.
That's so cool.
A few years later, I guess as a side adventure, because she's an overachiever, obviously, she worked as a secretary to the Director General of the Women's National War Relief Association during the Spanish-American War. And I went on a really big rabbit hole research situation on this organization, and I could do a whole episode just about this and the women behind it. But, that's not this episode, so that'll be a future one. Around 1903, after spending so much time in the patent office, seeing drawings of amazing flying machines, Emma got into making mechanical and aeronautic toys.
Yeah, and she talks about letting these zip around her apartment. And she even suggests that she sold some of these. So they were like rubber, kind of like rubber band airplanes with little propellers.
Oh, and you.
Hmm.
That's so cool.
Oh, fun.
And then she would, she would sew balloons to make, like little hot air balloons. And she would zip those around her apartment too.
Oh my gosh. That's so fun. That makes me think of those there were these little like flying Barbies, and you would pull the, do you know what I'm talking? You like wind them up and
No.
they go. They were.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. Yes.
Oh, I realize
I missed out on that.
just the audio doesn't know why I made that noise.
I know.
I'll just know that there was like some sort of propeller effect.
It flies, it's fine. Lilian always had her mind in the future. She recognized the importance of educating the next generation on the current advancements in the booming field of aviation. She started the first Junior Aero Club in 1908. They met in her New York residence, where the living room was her workshop.
That's so cool.
Her apartment was decorated with aircraft models of her own design and other mechanical toys. In a New York Times article issued on November 28, 1909, she was named the first woman in the world to create an airplane. In explaining her design, she said, "The machine of the Wright brothers had to be navigated by its operator lying flat and waving his legs in the air. My machine will be operated by a woman, I hope, and she will swing in a basket below and balance it as automatically as does a person riding a bicycle." She would use model airplanes to test out her designs.
And this is one thing that I talk about a lot in the book and that I love. She failed so many times. I mean, her initial designs were not successful. She tells story after story of them crashing and her having to make adjustments and try again. And so that is, for me, that is such a good message for young people and to inspire young people and to let them know, if you're going to invent, you're going to fail. It's fine. Just move on and do the next thing. And I can imagine her sharing these lessons with the kids who are part of the Junior Aero Club. And again, she had been so nurtured by her grandfather and her mother, who had helped inspire her. And she really wanted to do the same thing for this next generation, because she really believed flying was going to be the future and it would shape everything that we would do. And she had visions of airplanes being used in war, surveying. She talks about it being used the same way a trolley is used for general transportation. So she was really a visionary, and she wanted to nurture the next generation. And part of that nurturing was failing over and over as she tried to make these models that didn't work.
Absolutely. I bet it was comforting as probably as a member of that Junior Aero Club, going into her, I'm assuming, small New York City apartment that is just covered in, just filled with past failures, past learned, like, well, this one doesn't work, this is a new way to not do things, sort of approach, and keeping those around to be like, well, we tried this and this is why it didn't work, let's make this adjustment on this one. And I have to imagine that was so, that it was so nurturing for them. Miss Todd exhibited her first airplane design at Madison Square Garden in an aero show. One of the people in attendance was Olivia Sage, the widow of a wealthy financier and politician, Russell Sage.
Oh.
She took an interest in Lilian and said, "I've always been interested in Lilian because I think she's a capable woman and I like to see women do things." She gave her $7,000 to design and build her aircraft.
And they had actually had a previous relationship. So you talked about the national Women's War Relief Society.
Mhm.
Olivia Sage and some other women, Helen Gould, were a part of that society. And so Lillian's first contact with Olivia Sage was probably through that and through the women's New York law class, NYU law class. They had known each other for a while. And in fact, some of the women from there had helped her get a job as secretary to the World's Fair in St. Louis for a year, where she saw that there was a big aviation concourse, and her apartment overlooked the aviation concourse. This is in 1904.
Oh my gosh.
So that was kind of further inspiration. So she had probably known Olivia Sage for, I'm guessing, about 10, 15 years,
Okay.
when she kind of came back into her life and agreed to finance. She went by Lilian. It's Emma Lilian Todd, but she mostly went by Lilian.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool because in that same article about Madison Square Garden, there was mention that Andrew Carnegie was interested in Lilian Todd's design. And there was even a sentence in there that said he had said he would be willing to fund her to build a full-sized airplane. Well, that never happened. Well, guess who came to the rescue? Another woman.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a whole, from her mom to Olivia Sage providing the funding, this is a whole stream of women supporting women.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so interesting to hear about in this time period, especially with the amount of money that they were dealing with,
so much money
to fund that. I mean,
yeah.
Well, and Olivia Sage was essentially like the Bill Gates of that time period. I mean, her husband's had died, and he had so much money. It's essentially like a Bill Gates or a Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I like that she wanted to use that money toward other women, specifically in that quote. She's like, I like to see women do things. Like and if I'm here with all this money, I might as well help them do things.
Yeah.
Like, that's so.
And she did support, Olivia Sage did support a lot of women's causes and women's education. That was sort of her area of philanthropy. So this was one in many projects that she was funding.
Might have to do an episode about her.
Or at least a mini or something.
There's a great biography by Ruth Crocker.
Okay.
I'll have to check
Absolutely.
it out.
When she showcased her plane in the 1909 Interborough Fair in New York, wow, that was a hard sentence for me to say, she didn't have a proper airplane engine, settling for a car engine, which unsurprisingly did not work. She then waited a year for a proper engine.
Wow.
She said, "It's a work that grips you. I work myself 17 hours a day and then fuss because I've got to go to bed and waste time sleeping." On November 8th, 1910, the New York Herald published the following article. I have to say that this reminds me of an episode of The Office where they have a really, really long title because the title reads, "Biplane she built herself. New York woman's year of efforts are at last crowned with success." Like, could that be a longer title?
It's probably like half the cover of like that, like with those headlines.
And the article reads as follows. After years of effort, Miss E. Lilian Todd of number 131 West 23rd Street realized her ambition yesterday when she had the pleasure of seeing a biplane, the work of her hands and brain, fly across the Garden City aviation field. After having the machine built numerous times, Miss Todd, about 4 months ago, announced that she had a biplane which she thought would fly. She then tried to get an engine, but was met with defeat, as the engines which she tried were not suitable. Finally, a modified Rheineck motor was declared satisfactory. A good-sized crowd was on hand to witness the first attempt to fly the biplane. Mr. Didier Masson.
I always say Masson. I don't do. He's French.
Oh,
I don't speak French. German was. Yeah, I took German. It's not super helpful.
Mr. Didier Masson was the aviator. He ran the machine across the ground, then went to the air for 20 feet and made a turn at the far end, returning to the starting place where he was enthusiastically received by Miss Todd and the crowd. The upper planes of the biplane were shaped.
So essentially it's a biplane, right?
Yeah.
And it actually even has ailerons in the middle, which almost make it look like a triplane. And so they call each of these things planes.
Okay.
Which is why it's confusing. The terminology they use then is very different than the terminology they use in aviation today. So sometimes it's hard to interpret exactly what's going on.
Right. Yeah. I was like making these notes and then trying to figure out what they mean. But then when you try to look further into what it means, you get lost in a whole other situation of vocabulary where you're like, what? Okay.
So we would call them the wings, right? We would say it has two or three sets of wings. They call them planes.
Yeah. So the rest of the article states the upper planes of the biplane were shaped somewhat like a bird's wings when in flight, while the lower planes are level. The chassis is about 5 feet high. So a few things.
Okay.
Was it popular for newspapers to publish someone's address?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to go back and read historical newspapers. So a lot of my sources came from the Library of Congress has digitized a lot of historic newspapers, and then the New York Times also has their archives online, and there were some other sources. But if you go back and read early newspapers, it's not the same journalistic standards as they are today. I mean, her name is messed up so many times in so many different, she's called Lily, she's called Emily, Laura, she's called all these different things. The journalistic standards were not quite the same. And yes, they would publish your address.
I can't imagine my address being published in the New York Herald. Especially, like, I don't know, I would feel like as a woman, I'm assuming she was met with a lot of backlash in general for wanting to do all of these things, and I don't think I'd want these people knowing where I live.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they published it. I mean, she doesn't, there were crowds out at the airfield when she was flying. That was kind of a common pursuit, to go out for a day, tool your little car out there and watch all these people take off in their airplane designs. That was sort of a fun day out. But yeah, there's no mentions of any crowds gathering outside her apartment. Just at the airfield.
And I'm actually kind of surprised at the way the article was written. I feel like in the past, based on, journalistic standards of the past, and, for example, her name being so egregiously incorrect all the time, I feel like this article was very positive of her experience, of her invention, just kind of being like, this woman who's been like trying and failing for so long has finally succeeded, and there was a crowd there, and I was like reading, I was like, oh, this is nice text.
Well, it's, she was a curiosity, and I think she was doing something so unusual that there was a lot of newspaper coverage, and most of it was fairly positive, and it was more written from the standpoint of, here's this curiosity, this woman doing something that nobody else is doing. So they wanted to cover it. And so, for me as a researcher, that's one thing that I found so interesting. For someone who was so well documented during her journey of making the airplane, how did we lose her to history, right? So when I was researching, there's no adult biography of her. So it was a lot of primary source research. So for me, that was one of the really interesting things, was how easily she slipped from history, given all this documentation in these major newspapers.
Yeah. And also, like, the fact that she wasn't just like a random, quote unquote, like nobody. Like, she knew people. She was in these circles. She worked in like patent office. There is, like you said, so much documentation of her, and it's not like she's someone who should have slipped through the cracks. Not that anyone should slip through the cracks. Don't come for me. But, like,
Well, and you make a good point, which is she was a member of first the Aero Club, which was a group of kind of aviation enthusiasts who were into airplanes. And then she became the first woman and only woman member of the Aeronautics Society of New York. So she was going to lectures as much as she could, because sometimes she was barred from them because they would be held in locations that were not open to women. But, her airplane was housed at the Aeronautics Society shed at Mineola Field, alongside all these other airplanes of other people who were experimenting. So it is interesting because she was well documented. She was moving in these same circles as all these other inventors, and yet we lost her story.
Yeah, well, you brought it back, which is amazing. And we're so happy that you've brought this story to our attention, because I had a blast. My father is a pilot, and so yeah, he was an F-15 fighter pilot, and now he's a commercial pilot. So I love planes. He's terrified of them, but absolutely. I love planes.
Hate flying.
Well, let's chat about the plane itself. It was constructed out of straight grain spruce. The upper coverings of the wings were muslin. Piano wire held the wings together, and there were 2 seats, and it was 35 feet in length.
Piano wires held it together. Now, I know piano wires are super strong.
Very strong.
But to withstand, like, the flying capability.
Well, part of this is... it does seem really weird today, but the earliest airplanes were built of wood and wire and fabric. And part of it is that these are readily available materials.
Sure.
Home inventors can use them, right? They can get their hands on them easily. I mean, they can't machine metal, right? You need special equipment.
Right.
So it's readily available. They're used to working with these materials. They're lightweight, which is critical to getting your plane in the air. And they're not going that fast, right? These airplanes, we wouldn't go 60, 70 miles an hour in a wood and fabric, or we wouldn't want to for a long time. But these early airplanes are going pretty slowly, like, 15, 20 miles an hour. So they can withstand what they need to fly. And in fact, fabric was used, at least for portions of airplanes, up into World War II. Over time, they started adding and reinforcing with more and more metal pieces, and then eventually went to all metal. But it is pretty cool when you if you go to a museum and you look at early airplanes, and you can even see like the zigzag from the scissors, the zigzags, you can see the zigzag edges of the fabric. And it's pretty cool, but that was really common. But eventually they did have to move away from it as speeds increased, altitudes increased. And frankly, fabric and wood just don't stand up in the elements. So they disintegrate pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about. I hadn't even really considered the elements being a thing, just because
where we are now,
yeah,
what we're used to,
and you're just like, what? It's fine, but of course it's gonna melt away. It's gonna get moldy. It's gonna melt away. Like, oh my gosh. She had actually wanted to pilot her own airplane and applied for permission at the Richmond Borough Commissioner of Public Works. Because why wouldn't you want to fly your own creation, honestly?
Right.
Like, you built it, let me fly it.
Yeah.
Well, she had even considered applying for a permit to fly it anywhere in the United States. And the permit was ultimately denied.
Boo.
Super boo.
Well, and part of it is, so interestingly, the first pilot's licenses wouldn't be given out for another 10 years or so, 10, 15 years. But again, she's such a visionary. She feels like, of course I should get some kind of license to fly my airplane. She also applied for airplane insurance, which when she applied to the insurance company, they're like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, if I have a problem and this thing, breaks, maybe I need some insurance. And they had no idea what she's talking about. And that's kind of what happened here. So Richmond Borough is now Staten Island, as you guys, I'm sure know, being New Yorkers. But they kind of looked at her application and could not fathom what she was talking about because it was just so beyond their comprehension. So they're like, is she asking to use the roads as a runway? Like they couldn't even understand what she was asking, that she was seeking approval.
Oh, that is hysterical.
I'm actually still hung up about that Staten Island fact. I didn't know that.
He's born and raised Queens.
And I don't really, I have no allegiance or ties to Staten Island except for being the 5th borough, but that is something else that I've learned today that's new. So
well, and honestly, I had no idea. And when I kept seeing this Richmond Borough coming up, I had to go down that rabbit hole. And I was like, what is Richmond Borough?
Yes, right.
I guess it was like in the 70s. I think it was renamed in the 70s.
Really? That recent?
Because Rhode Island is actually something else too. Rhode Island is actually a longer name. They just shortened it. It's like Rhode Island and something, but they just brought it down to Rhode Island. So
see, now I'm gonna have to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, check
right. These are the dangers of history.
Oh my gosh, the rabbit holes that I end up on all these weird twisty turns, and then I end up in something that has nothing to do with anything that's being discussed, and I'm like, I gotta rewind here.
Yeah, you gotta.
Where even are we?
Rewind. Yeah.
Rewind. Oh, can't get through an episode.
Nice Hamilton reference.
Thank
Yes.
you.
It was him this time.
Yeah,
it wasn't me.
It's right there. Had to.
After the death of Olivia Sage, Lilian moved to Pasadena, California in the first half of the 1920s. Now, I couldn't find much about Lilian from leading up to this time and then really after. There wasn't.
So she pretty much she drops off the map essentially, because this is the big burning question. Why does she stop building airplanes? And we don't know if if Olivia Sage just wouldn't back her anymore and she couldn't find another backer. There are also some hints. Well, there aren't hints. She says she faced a lot of sexism in New York.
Oh, absolutely.
And that she felt like part of the reason she couldn't get an engine for so long was the men weren't being helpful, and that she would take her plane south the next time she was going to fly because she didn't want to be around the people at Mineola Field. But we don't know why she didn't keep going. And so for me, that is the thing I would love to find out more than anything else, because like so many women, we don't have a diary. We don't have a journal. We don't have anything that's going to round out the story. And since her big effort was over, the newspapers weren't covering her anymore because she wasn't doing anything they found super interesting. So yeah, she went to work for Olivia Sage. And then when Olivia Sage died, she moved to California, but we have no idea what happened to her. And in fact, it's only very recently that we even figured out where her cremated remains went. They're in a Moravian cemetery on Staten Island. But I found that out from a genealogical researcher within the past 6 months, probably. We could not find out where she was buried. So you're not the only one. She fell off the radar, except for a few census records here and there. There's really nothing else about her.
Interesting.
Yeah, especially after she stopped working for Mrs. Sage.
Yeah, I wonder if that had just a really profound effect on her as a person. It sounds like Olivia was a major support system in her life throughout it. In the beginning, it sounds like it was kind of in and out just because of circles you travel in life. But then, at the end of their lives, it sounds like it must have been just like all right, well, she's gone. I have no ties here. I have no ties here anymore. Like it's time for me to just get out. I do wish there were like journals or something, because somebody should have followed up on her. Like,
well, and that is so she did have a scrapbook, which I've seen pictures. It sold on eBay several years ago to a private collector. And again, this is the kind of the shame of our undiscovered history, because had we known how truly important she was, hopefully a museum would have scooped up that scrapbook.
Yeah.
It appears to be mostly clippings of newspaper articles. But there probably were some notes in the margins or something. And more, I would have loved to have seen it. But again, it went to a private collector. I tracked the collector down. He didn't want to share the information. And so this is the hard part about doing history. I know you have to tell the story with the resources.
Want to share that?
I think he has in mind to do his own book.
Oh.
And so he didn't want to share. Happens.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I kind of really super hate though that if it was relatively recently sold to a private collector. So like why wasn't the like aerospace museum participating in and trying to get this into their collection, or like any number of aeronautic like organizations that could hopefully, I don't know, thrust it into the spotlight where it should be.
Well, it's, and it's interesting because I did email with the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum with some of the curators there, and everybody has their own research interest, and she's not the focus of anybody's research interest. There is a curator who talks about her as part of the Aeronautics Society. He's done research on the Aeronautics Society, and she's mentioned in an article that he wrote. But she really, when I reached out to say, hey, is anybody studying her? Can I connect with another researcher? They said, no, nobody here is studying her. Had she been the focus, I think, of somebody's research, it probably would have been a different story.
Yeah.
Now she is going, I guess they'll be doing a lot of the Smithsonian Air and Space exhibits, and they are supposed to open a new exhibit in 2022 that will mention her alongside other people working on their own airplanes beyond the big names like the Wrights and Curtis and some of the other people.
Good.
But again, she's kind of ancillary, right? She's not the real focus.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Interesting. Miss E. Lilian Todd died on September 26, 1937 at the Huntington Memorial Hospital. As mentioned, she was cremated and her remains were sent to New York, where they were buried on June 8, 1938. So, I want to talk about a little bit of recognition that she has received in the last like decade. So in 2013, director animator Christina Yee created a short film called Miss Todd with a student team at the National Film and Television School. It was a short stop-motion musical film.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? That was so interesting. I was like, ooh.
Stop-motion musical. I don't know if I've seen that yet.
I don't think I have. It actually won the Foreign Film Award Gold Medal at the 2013 Student Academy Awards.
Damn right. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds about right then. Okay.
In 2015, recording artist. In 2015, recording artist Eliza Vetta released a music video called Icarus that featured exclusively animation from the before mentioned Miss Todd. And most recently, in 2020, Wood Wire Wings, Emma Lilian Todd invents an airplane by Kirsten W. Why can't I read? By Kirsten W. Larson and illustrated by Tracy. Can you pronounce her last name?
Subasak. Yeah, Tracy Subasak.
And it was published. And if you are watching the video, it's being held up right now. It's a gorgeous, it's so beautifully illustrated and so lovely to read through it. Also, it looks great in Kindle. It's all
good.
it looks really good.
Did you come up with the idea for the cover art, or
No, so the cool thing about this is a picture book for upper elementary. The cool thing about picture books is a lot of times they're a marriage of the art and the words. And I had no communication with Tracy except to send her documentation and pictures for her to use. And then I was able to give feedback to see if there were any historical inaccuracies.
Mhm.
But no, she came up with the cover design.
So-
And yeah. So it's the cover shows she was inspired. Heather talked about her interest in a bird-like design. And so the cover has lots of pictures of birds, and it has Lilian looking up, kind of dreamily at an airplane. She's wearing blue, which Tracy said she wanted to use a lot of blue because the sky, right? So it's pretty cool. So yeah, it's this, picture books are this beautiful, magical marriage of art and text that sort of come together like, what is it, a Reese's peanut butter cup, right?
That's
You got
great.
his attention.
That's good.
Who put chocolate in my peanut butter? Who put peanut butter
That
in my
sounds. It's such a unique marriage, though, of the arts, because she was inspired by what you gave her, and then she gave it back to you, and you are easily just as inspired and interested
it's
in it. That's
gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend, I know we have teachers that listen, definitely get that in your classroom bookshelves, because number one, it's important to have books about women. If girls can read books about men throughout their entire lives, boys can read books about women. They will be inspired. It's
Absolutely.
I won't go on that rant, but it's amazing, and it's enjoyable as an adult to read. I got a little emotional at at a point or two. It's fine. I'm always emotional. It's fine. But it's so well done. So absolutely everyone go get that, because they did such an incredible job with it.
And I should say real quick that for any educators or homeschoolers, I do have a curriculum guide on my website that goes with the book, and also a video engineering design activity for students, and a Flipgrid where they can build their own designs and upload them. So there's a lot of educational resources on my website, which is Kirsten-W-Larson.com.
Amazing.
That's great. I feel like that's so useful now, especially with virtual classrooms having to be a thing. Not everyone can make it to the classroom.
Yeah.
For safety reasons.
Yeah.
So that's an excellent resource. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make sure to have all that, and like the links for all of that in like show notes and all of that stuff, so that it's really easily accessible. And I'm going to leave you guys with this quote before we get into, obviously, our last little bit. So she said, "There is no work so discouraging, so exasperating, so delightful, so mean, so difficult, so exhilarating as building airplanes." That's when I got a little emotional. I was like, oh, like, oh, passion, like, gosh, to the fact that she was so invested in the ideas of what it could be in the future, and she knew that she had to be part of that development.
Yeah, and she talks about that. She talks about invention as being something in her blood, right? Something that kind of infected her like a germ, and she could not invent. She had to do it. She was so compelled, and she has some great quotes. And you picked my favorite one, which I put on bookmarks that I had printed, because that too just shows her passion, her dedication through failure all the way to success.
And it's also something in the way that she states it, by saying that it's discouraging, but it's exhilarating, but it's mean, but it's it's just, a need, it's so telling of her approach to life, to invention, to be like, yeah, of course, as we were saying earlier, like, of course you're going to fail, and you're going to be sad about it, and you're going to be heartbroken that it just, another thing didn't work. But there's always that little thing in the back of your mind that's saying like, well, maybe if we just adjust it like this little way and this little way, and then those tiny adjustments eventually end up in a successful launch. That's just so amazing.
Well, and I think as a creator, that's what I connected to, because if writing, any creative process is very similar, right? You go through so many drafts, so many things are not working, and yet there's something there that compels you forward, and you make little adjustments or major overhauls until you get it right. And so I think for me, aside from the interest in aviation and aviation history, I think that as a creator is what I really connected to, was that passion and that creativity and that drive to recognize her big dream.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today. This, was a new this is our test to see how this goes, and I think this was amazing, and it was so incredible to have all of your extra insight, and just thank you so much for getting up so early to record this with us today.
Oh, it has absolutely been my pleasure. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, we appreciate you.
Yes,
and
thank
especially
you.
for bringing this story to our attention, and making sure that it has its place in her story. Yeah. And thank you all so much for tuning in again. Come back this Friday for an interview with producer and performing artist Sarah Glassman. She is the co-creator of High Glass Productions. She's a concert pianist also who plays in the best piano bars in New York City. She talks about where she gets her creativity from, and she talks about how much she loves her mom. Okay, so before you guys skedaddle, please subscribe, rate, and review. Tell your friends. It really helps the show grow and grow. Right now, we have our merch campaign going on. So for the whole month of September, you can head over to our Bonfire website to get your Making Her Story shirts. We're also going to have some beanies and sweatshirts and all kinds of new designs. 20% of the profits from those sales are going to be going to the Henry Street Settlement in New York City. They provide coronavirus aid to their community as well as across New York City. They provide support for arts institutions, for mental health institutions, battered women's shelter. They're a really incredible organization. So come support us so that we can support them. And the rest of the profits go right back into the podcast for new equipment and miscellaneous expenses that come with running the podcast. If you want some extra daily inspiration, please follow us on the social medias on Twitter,
at the Her Story Pod,
Instagram,
Women of Her Story Podcast.
You can visit our website at
ofherstory.com.
Of Her Story.
Of Her.
Or you can send us an email to
Women of Her Story Podcast at gmail.com.
Until Friday, be safe, stay healthy, and show the world what you're made of.
Bye. This is a New York Glitch production.